Today we're going to talk about how to actually transition genders, specifically medically transitioning. So yes, it is absolutely true that you do not need to medically transition if you're transgender. However, it seems to be the option most people decide to go with. It all just depends on your level of dysphoria that you feel. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So the first step is you actually need to get yourself on hormones. And it can be simple or it can be really complicated, just depending like what city you live in and what your options are. Typically bigger cities, it's a little bit easier than smaller towns, just because they're more familiar with the process and it's easier to find a physician who will do that. Now, there's lots of physicians you can actually go to. I happen to go to just a general family practitioner. You can also go to an endocrinologist, or like I think an OBGYN will also be able to help you. So make sure you look around and kind of explore your options. Now, physicians are going to fall into two different categories. So first, you have physicians that will practice under what's called informed consent. This is what my physician does. Basically, with informed consent, you don't have to jump through really any hoops or anything to get started. You simply make an appointment with the physician, explain your situation, how you feel, and they'll give you like a form to sign, like a waiver saying that you won't hold them responsible if anything bad happens, and you understand the risks and the effects and the permanent changes that are going to happen. And once you do that, typically they'll go ahead and prescribe hormones once you do some blood work. It's a pretty quick process. On my first visit to my physician, I actually got hormones right away. I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to go back. I got them on the very first visit. You also could run into doctors who don't practice under this informed consent method, and they'll make you go to a therapist first. And if they do, you'll have to go see a therapist for 1 to 3, 4, 5 sessions and talk it over with them, and then they'll write you a letter of recommendation. The doctor will need this letter of recommendation before they will feel comfortable prescribing hormones. So there's a few more hoops to jump through, and you may really not have an option if you live in a smaller town and the physicians just aren't as comfortable with it and they don't, actively treat people who are trans. So explore your options, call around to some different offices and ask the staff, do the doctors prescribe under informed consent, or am I going to need a therapist letter, and kind of get a feel. I called like 3 or 4 places, and I found one that did informed consent just because it was the easiest and the quickest, and that's what worked best for me. So once you're on hormones, it is definitely a super slow process, so don't get in any hurry by any means, because it takes a really, really long time before those changes all start to show up and take effect. Some will happen really quickly, and then some will take a really long time, like years. So most doctors, or at least the ones that I'm familiar with, they will recommend that you stay on hormones for about 2 years before you start to do anything else like surgery or any other changes to yourself. But there's still a lot you can do in that process and in that time period. For example, I started having like my facial hair removed and body hair removed from certain places that I didn't like, just because it would make life easier once I switched to living full-time as my preferred gender, which is female. And so I spent probably the first 6-8 months of my transition while I was on hormones doing laser hair removal, so that when I did make my transition, I wouldn't be, cursed with an awful 5 o'clock shadow or things like that. There's a couple different, methods for hair removal, and I've talked about them in the past. I'll link to some up here above. Basically, I did laser. You can also do electrolysis, and there's some differences that you can understand by watching some of those videos. I won't get into them too in depth here. But there's other things that you can do. So I started removing like unwanted hair and things like that. There's no right or wrong time necessarily when you have to, make the big switch and go full time as living as your preferred gender. For me personally, I waited 8 months before I finally transitioned fully to living full-time. But you could do it right away from starting hormones. You could do it from before you started hormones. You could wait years even. It's just whatever your comfort level is and your level of dysphoria. Everybody's situation is very different and personal. There's no right or wrong way to do it, and you shouldn't model your transition on someone else's. Your mileage may vary. You can also do other things like go ahead and get your legal name changed, and this may also vary depending which state you live in. I live in Texas, so for me, I just had to have a letter from my physician and from my therapist saying that yes, they agreed with this decision. I'm not a crazy person, at least not when it comes to my gender, and that they supported it. And and I had done irreversible changes to my body caused by hormones. This is the way I lived, and it was in my best interest to change my name and my gender marker. So you may or may not be able to go ahead and get that done, but I recommend doing it as soon as you're able to, just because it makes life so much easier. You don't have to worry about like being pulled over or getting carded when you go to a bar to buy a drink and your driver's license not look anything like you anymore. So I do recommend getting that done as soon as you can. Once enough time has elapsed on hormones and you've been on them long enough to where you're pretty much going to get all the changes that you can expect, because really the changes on hormones start to plateau after about 2 years. You'll see a lot of them in the first year and they kind of slow down after that. And then really after 2 years, it's more like just a maintenance type thing because your body needs hormones. So once that time has passed and your physician is on board, you can go ahead and start exploring surgery options. And once again, this is different for everyone depending on which surgeries you want to have. Not all trans people have all surgeries, Not everybody has the big one, so to speak, where they get bottom surgery or gender reassignment surgery. But if surgery is something you want to pursue after that process, you will, however, need to befriend a therapist or a psychologist, somebody with a PhD. The PhD part is very important because there aren't any surgeons that I'm aware of that will operate on you if you don't have letters of recommendation from a PhD and from your physician. You can look at doing top surgery and getting, breast implants if you are male to female, or you can also do top surgery if you are female to male, which is basically like a double mastectomy where they remove your breasts and give you a more masculine looking chest. Myself, I plan on doing top surgery here in a few months. My date's coming up soon. It'll be my first surgery, so I'm really excited about that. I've also talked about that a lot, I've also talked about that a lot in some other videos, which I will link up above for you guys in your viewing pleasure. And then you also have options such as like facial feminization, which I also plan on doing, where they basically like reshape the bones and in your face to give you a more feminine appearance, which really helps as far as like quality of life standpoints go. If you don't have thick enough skin to where you don't mind all the heckling and people just being general jerks, then it's something that would really improve your quality of life. And also if you're just not happy with the way you look when you look in the mirror, then it's something that you can look into as well. And then the last one is, of course, bottom surgery or gender reassignment surgery or SRS, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing, where you can basically change your genitals to look like that of, the sex that you identify with. And I also plan to do that. I plan on having all three, as a matter of fact, but I have to space them out because they're so expensive and insurance a lot of times does not pay for it. But there's no right or wrong order you want to do those in. You can do that any way in which you choose. However, for top surgery, most surgeons recommend at least a full year on hormones so you have enough like breast tissue before you can get implants. And then on bottom surgery, most physicians, most surgeons expect you to be on hormones for at least a year, sometimes 2, depending on the surgeon, and that you actually live your life as your preferred gender, just because it's not reversible. So they don't want to make any mistakes, and they want to make sure that you understand. But that's really the gist of how you go about transitioning genders, whether this is something you're trying to get information on because you are trans and you're just starting your process, or you're just somebody who's curious and you don't understand. You see it in the news all the time and you're curious, like, how does that even work? That's how it happens. It's pretty straightforward, really. It just takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes several years before you finish transitioning physically and medically. Anyways, you guys, if this is your very first time on the channel, I encourage you to press that subscribe button down below, especially if you're curious as to how, the everyday life of someone who is trans plays out. I kind of showcase that for you guys here, or if you're just somebody who's curious and wants to learn more, maybe you know someone who's trans. Either way, this is the right place for you. This community around this channel is so amazing and so awesome, so you guys can learn so much stuff just from going in the comment section and reading the stories from other people here. Anyways, I love you all so much. Thank you so much for watching. I just said so much times. And I will see you guys really soon, tomorrow in fact. Until then, be kind and make good choices. See ya.